That field was an eyesore and a fire hazard, and frankly, it was dragging down everyone's property value. So I sent a crew out to take care of it. You should be thanking us. That was Brenda Tasker, president of the Stone Ridge Meadows Homeowners Association, for 9 years running, standing on my gravel drive in white sneakers and a hot pink blazer, explaining to me why she had sent 3 men with bush hogs onto 30 acres of my land and cut it to the dirt. The field she called an eyesore was a native shortgrass restoration I had spent 4 years rebuilding by hand, and it carried a recorded easement, older than her subdivision, older than her marriage, older than the road her house sat on. My name is Wade Calloway. I am 61 years old. I spent 30 years as a civil engineer, running irrigation and drainage jobs across the Front Range, and the one thing she never bothered to check before she sent that crew was whether she had any authority over my ground at all. She did not. And what she also did not know was that the company she hired to do the cutting was already on paper 3 payments away from belonging to me. So let me ask you something before I tell you the rest. If somebody flattened 4 years of your work in an afternoon and then told you to say thank you, what would you have done? I want you to hold your answer. Because I did not yell. I did not call a lawyer that first day. I went and got my folder. I should back up and tell you how I came to own a hayfield. I did not farm. My wife, Carol, grew up on that land. Her grandfather, a man named Otto, homesteaded the lower section in the 1920s, and when the county started selling off the dryland parcels around it after the war, he bought what he could and recorded everything at the courthouse the same week. Because he had watched neighbors lose ground to sloppy paperwork, and he was not going to be one of them. Carol used to tell me that Otto kept his deeds in a tin biscuit box on top of the icebox, and that he would take them down on Sunday afternoons and read them the way other men read the Bible, running his thumb under each line. She thought it was funny when she was a girl. She understood it better when she was older. I understood it the day a banker tried to tell me a parcel line ran somewhere it did not, and I drove to the courthouse and proved him wrong with a document older than his bank. Carol inherited 30 acres of it when her mother passed. We built our house on the high corner in 1994, poured the foundation ourselves over 2 long weekends, and we raised our daughter, Maddie, looking out the kitchen window at that field. Carol used to stand at that window with her coffee in the morning and name the birds that came through: meadowlarks in the spring, a pair of harriers that hunted the draw every fall. She said the field was the last honest thing in the county, and back then I thought that was just something she said. Carol died of a stroke 6 years ago, on a Tuesday in October, while she was hanging laundry on the line behind the house. I was 40 minutes away on a job site. By the time I got to the hospital, she was already gone, and the last thing she had touched was a clothespin, and I kept it, and it is in my truck console. To this day, after the funeral, I could not bring myself to lease the field out the way we always had to a neighbor for hay. The thought of somebody else's tractor on it made my chest tight. So, I did the thing an engineer does when he is grieving and does not want to talk about it. I took on a project. The project was the field. Carol had always said the old hay monoculture was tired, that the soil wanted what used to grow there before anybody plowed it. So I spent 4 years reseeding it in native blue, grama, and buffalo grass, and a dozen wildflower mixes. Working off a restoration plan I drew up myself and filed with the county extension office. The first year almost nothing came up, and I knelt in the dirt in April and dug for the seed with my fingers and found it sitting there dormant, waiting on heat, and I learned patience from a handful of soil the way I never learned it from people. The second year the blue grama came in like green smoke across the lower acres. I fenced the pollinator strips with my own posts and wire. I built 2 small check dams in the draw out of native rock to slow the spring runoff, exactly the way I had built bigger ones for paying clients for 30 years. Except these I built for nothing. For nobody. For a dead woman who used to name the birds. I logged the rainfall and the germination rates and the bloom dates on a legal pad the way I had logged every job site for 3 decades. Maddie, who was 15 and 16 and 17 across those years, walked the strips with me on Sundays and learned the names of the wildflowers, and somewhere in there, the field stopped being how I grieved and started being how she and I talked. And in the second year, because the work qualified under the state program, I recorded a conservation easement on the lower 20 acres through a regional land trust. That meant the restoration was not just my hobby. It was a legal instrument recorded at the county, with my name and the trust's name, and a date that mattered, and language in it that said the draw and its wetland buffer could not be altered, filled, or built over, in perpetuity. The land trust sent a young woman named Priya out to walk the boundary and photograph the baseline conditions, and she told me it was one of the cleanest small restorations she had monitored. And I wrote that down too, because a compliment from a professional is a fact, and facts go in the folder. That is the thing I want you to remember. I filed it. I always file it. Stone Ridge Meadows went up across the county road in 2010. A developer named Kurt Tasker bought the old Henley quarter section, put in 94 houses on quarter-acre lots, paved a loop road, and formed a homeowners association to run the place. His wife, Brenda, became president of that association in the first year and never gave it up. For a long time, none of that touched me. My field was on the far side, in unincorporated county land. Never annexed, never platted, never part of their declaration. I knew that because I had read their declaration. It was a public document, recorded at the same courthouse where Carol's grandfather had filed his deeds. And one rainy afternoon I had pulled it and read all 40 pages because that is what I do. The first letter came in the spring of the 4th year. It was on Stone Ridge letterhead, embossed, with a little engraved drawing of mountains the development did not actually have a view of, and it was signed by Brenda in blue ink, with a flourish under her name. It informed me that my property was, in her words, functionally part of the Stone Ridge Meadows viewshed, and that the association's architectural and ground standards therefore applied to it. It cited a fine of $50 a week for what it called unmaintained vegetation in excess of 12 inches. My native grasses, the ones I had spent 4 years coaxing out of dead soil, grow to about 30 inches by July. By her math, I owed the association a fine for every blade of it. I drove over to her house, which was the largest one on the loop, with a 3-car garage and a lawn so green in a dry county that you knew somebody was paying for water they had no business using. Brenda answered the door in a tennis skirt and pearls and the kind of smile a person uses on someone they have already decided is slow. There was a golf cart in the driveway with the association logo on it. I told her plainly that my land was not in her subdivision, was not subject to her covenants, and that she was welcome to come read the plat at the courthouse any time she liked. She told me that the county was, in her words, behind the times, and that Stone Ridge represented the future of the area, and that I should get on board before, as she put it, the future got on board without me. I asked her if she had read her own declaration, the one that recorded where her authority stopped. She said she did not need to read it because she had written it. That was not true. Her husband's lawyer had written it, but I let it go. I said no thank you. And I drove home and I made a photocopy of her letter and I started a folder. I labeled it in black marker Stoneridge. I had no idea how thick it would get. The fines kept coming. 50 a week, every week, on the same letterhead, and I filed every one of them without paying a cent. Because you cannot owe a fine to an organization that has no jurisdiction over you. By the end of that first summer, I had 11 notices in the folder. 11. I photographed each one front and back and saved the images to a drive in my office and a second drive in the gun safe. The same way I used to back up survey data, because a record that exists in only one place is not a record. It is a rumor. That fall, the second escalation arrived, and it had a uniform attached to it. A code enforcement officer from the county came out. A young man named Dale Pruitt, polite, clearly uncomfortable, holding a clipboard with a complaint form on it. He told me the county had received a complaint about a weed and fire nuisance on my parcel, and that he was obligated to come look at it, regardless of who filed it. That is how it works, he said. Somebody files, we have to roll on it, even when we both know how it is going to come out. I told him I understood, that he was doing his job, and I meant it, because the man on the clipboard is not the enemy, when he is honest. I walked him out to the field. I showed him the restoration plan on file with the extension office. I showed him the recorded easement with the county clerk's stamp on it. I knelt and parted the grass and showed him the green at the base of it in October, and I told him a fire needs cured fuel, and this was living shortgrass holding moisture. Shorter and greener than the bluegrass lawns inside her subdivision that nobody was sighting. He crouched down next to me and felt it himself. He measured a stand with the tape on his belt. Then he stood up and did something I respected. He wrote in his report that the parcel was in compliance and that the complaint was without merit, and he showed me the line before he signed it. Before he left, he leaned against his truck and said something quiet that I wrote down that night, word for word. He said, "Mr. Calloway, if somebody keeps filing on you with no grounds, start keeping a log of every contact, the date, the time, who, and what, because at a certain point that stops being a complaint and starts being a documented pattern, and the county has tools for that, and so do you." I asked him how many it would take. He said a pattern is usually 3 or more documented incidents with no factual basis, but more is better, and recorded is better than remembered. I had 11 fine notices and 1 false county complaint. Sitting in a folder at home, I wrote the number down, 12, and I started a second page in the folder, a contact log just like he said, and I dated the first line that afternoon. Here is where I will step out for 1 second and then get right back to it. I know some of you are listening to this while you are out walking the dog or doing dishes, and you have a Brenda of your own somewhere in your life. Keep the receipts. That is all I will say for now. Back to the field. The next year, Brenda widened her aim. She could not get me through the county, so she went after the thing that made my project possible, which was access. The land trust that held my easement sent a monitor out once a year to walk the boundary and confirm the restoration was intact. And that monitor reached my lower acreage by a gravel maintenance lane that ran along the edge of the Stoneridge property. That lane was not Brenda's. It was a recorded access and maintenance easement, granted to Carol's grandfather in 1951, decades before anybody dreamed of Stoneridge Meadows. And it ran with my land in perpetuity. The Tasker development had been built around it. Their declaration even acknowledged it, in a paragraph I am certain Brenda never read. She had her landscaping crew put a gate across it, a welded steel gate, painted Stoneridge green, with a chain and a padlock. blocking a lane my family had used for 73 years. The crew that welded it belonged to a company called Tasker Grounds and Landscape, Kurt Tasker's company. The same outfit that mowed the subdivision, plowed its roads, and, as I would learn, carried most of the Tasker family's borrowing on its books. I did not cut the lock. I want to be clear about that because it would have felt good and it would have been exactly what she wanted. Instead, I photographed the gate, the weld, the padlock, and the little Tasker Grounds and Landscape sticker on the gate post. I went home and I pulled the 1951 easement out of the deed records, and I mailed a certified letter to the association and to Tasker Grounds documenting the obstruction of a recorded easement and the daily trespass it represented. I kept the green certified mail cards when they came back signed. That gate cost me one missed monitoring visit, which I had to reschedule, and it cost Brenda nothing. She could see it still went in the folder. It was around then that I started to understand the gate was not really about me. I had a neighbor, an old rancher named Russ Beeman, whose place backed up to the same county road, and Russ and I had coffee at the diner in town most Wednesdays, the kind of standing appointment two widowers fall into without ever calling it a friendship. One Wednesday, Russ stirred his coffee for a long time, and then told me the Taskers had been trying for 2 years to push a second phase of Stone Ridge onto the open ground east of the subdivision, 40 more lots, and that the County Planning Commission had stalled it because the drainage study did not pencil out. Russ had sat through one of the hearings out of nosiness. The water from that proposed second phase had to go somewhere, he said, and the natural somewhere was the low draw that ran straight through my lower 20 acres. He said it like it was gossip. I heard it like a survey crew hears a beep. Because the easement on my land, the conservation easement, said in plain recorded language that the draw and its native wetland buffer could not be altered, filled, or built over in perpetuity. My restoration was not just sentimental. Eindesfremd. It was sitting directly on top of the only path Kurt Tasker had to make his second phase drain. The check dams I had built out of native rock for a dead woman were, in the language of an engineer, the exact obstruction that made his project impossible. That was the moment the whole thing turned over in my head, the way a survey turns over when you finally find the original iron monument under 60 years of dirt and realize every fence in the valley is in the wrong place and always has been. Brenda did not want my field mowed because it was tall. The fines, the false complaints, the welded gate, none of it was about grass height or property values or view sheds. Brenda wanted my easement weakened, challenged, ignored, and eventually gone, because that easement was the one recorded thing standing between her husband and 40 more lots and the money under them. I did not say any of this to anyone, not even to Russ, who would have told the whole diner by Friday. I filed it. I requested the planning file under the open records law, every page of the second phase application, and it came back as a banker's box I had to sign for. And I read the drainage study at my kitchen table over 3 nights, the way I used to redline a contractor's submittal with a ruler and a red pen. And there it was on sheet C4. They had routed their 100-year storm flow straight down my draw across my conservation land, and they had simply assumed in a footnote that the easement could be amended or would not survive review. They had drawn 40 houses on top of a recorded perpetual instrument and assumed an old man would not fight. That assumption was the engine of the whole thing, and once I saw it on paper, I understood that everything Brenda did from there was going to get more desperate, not less, because her husband's financing was running out of road. Then came the morning of Maddie's graduation and the bush hogs. Maddie was 19 by then, finishing her 2-year program at community college up north, the first in Carol's line to get a degree, and she had asked me to be there, and there was nothing on this earth that was going to keep me from the third row of that gymnasium. I wore the tie. Carol bought me. I left at 6 in the morning with a thermos and the clothespin in the console. I watched my girl walk across the stage, and I clapped until my hands hurt, and I thought about Carol at the kitchen window, and I did not think about Brenda Tasker one single time all day, which was the last easy day I had for a while. I came back a little after 4, and as I came over the rise on the county road, I saw my field. My 4 years, cut to brown stubble from the fence to the draw. 30 acres. The pollinator strips were gone. The posts I had driven myself snapped off at the wire. The seed heads that were 3 weeks from setting were lying in windrows, dead and already curling in the afternoon heat. One of my native rock check dams had been driven over and scattered. And parked at the edge of my own gravel drive were 2 trucks with Tasker Grounds and Landscape on the doors. Green and gold, and Brenda Tasker, in her pink blazer, standing between them supervising, with a clipboard against her hip. I stopped the truck in the road. I do not remember deciding to. My hands were not steady on the wheel. I will not pretend they were, because that is the part of these stories people lie about, and the lie is no good to you. Maddie was in the passenger seat in her graduation dress, and she put her hand on my arm and said, "Real quiet, the way Carol used to say things that mattered, Dad. Get the camera." So I got the camera off the back seat, the good one, and I handed Maddie my phone for a second angle. And I want you to hear that the calm I am about to describe was not because I felt calm. There was a roaring in my ears. It was because my 19-year-old daughter, standing in the ruin of the thing that taught her the names of wildflowers, reminded her grieving father what it is we do in this family. We do not swing, we document. That field was an eyesore and a fire hazard, Brenda said, walking toward me across the gravel like she owned it. And frankly, it was dragging down everyone's property value. So I sent a crew out to take care of it. You should be thanking us. She actually smiled when she said it. The kid on the crew, maybe 20, would not look at me, kept his eyes on his boots and his hands on the bush hog's hitch. The foreman, a heavy-set man named Gary, with sunburn on his neck, looked like he wanted the ground to open. He had clearly figured out something on that field that Brenda had not. I did not raise my voice. I asked Brenda one question. I asked her if she had a signed work order authorizing entry onto my parcel. She tipped her head, like the question was beneath her. "The association does not need a work order," she said, "because the parcel is functionally part of our jurisdiction." And the board voted on it Tuesday. There it was again. Functionally part of our jurisdiction. The third time I had heard that exact phrase come out of her mouth, in 3 different places. The first, on her own porch with a golf cart behind her. The second at the county counter when Dale Pruitt's complaint was filed in her handwriting. And now standing in the brown ruin of 4 years of my life with my daughter filming her. I asked her to say it again, plainly, and she did. Louder, for what she thought was my benefit. The board voted, she said. It is functionally ours. I had it on video this time, all of it. The trucks, the smile, the clipboard, the phrase. Maddie got it clean from 2 angles, and that night we saved every second of it to the drive in my office and the drive in the gun safe. Because a record that exists in only one place is not a record. It is a rumor. Gary, the foreman, waited until Brenda walked back to her car, and then he came over close and said, "Lo, that they had been told the parcel was HOA, common ground scheduled, for clearing, that he had a work order from the association on association paper. I told him to keep his copy of that work order safe because he was going to want it." He looked at me for a second, understanding only that something was wrong, not yet how wrong. And he nodded and kept his copy. It would matter more than he knew. Here's what cutting that field actually did. It destroyed a conservation restoration that was protected by a recorded easement, which is not a $50 HOA matter. It is a violation of a legal instrument with real penalties and a land trust with standing to enforce it. It put Tasker Grounds and Landscape, as the contractor who performed the work, directly on the hook for the damage, and it created the single cleanest, best documented incident in 5 years of my folder. Brenda thought she had erased my field. What she had actually done was sign her husband's company up as the responsible party for destroying federally and state-recognized conservation land, on video with a clipboard in her hand. I called the land trust that evening. I called the county. And then I made one more call to a man named Sal Ferraro, who I had worked with for 20 years and who now ran a small equipment finance brokerage. Because months earlier, when Russ first told me about the second phase, I had started reading everything public about Tasker Grounds and Landscape, the way I read everything. And what I had found in the public filings was that Kurt Tasker had borrowed heavily to buy his mowers and his trucks and his skid steers, and that the loans were secured by the equipment itself, recorded as liens at the Secretary of State's office, and that the paper on most of that debt had been bundled and sold to a regional lender that Sal happened to do business with. The Tasker Landscaping Company, the one that had just flattened my field, was leveraged to the windows, and it was behind on its payments. I'm going to slow down here, because this is the part people get wrong when they tell this story back to me. I did not get angry and decide to ruin a man. I got specific. There is a difference, and the difference is the whole point. What I did over the next 90 days was legal, quiet, and patient. With the land trust, I documented the destruction of the conservation easement, and Priya came out the next morning and walked the cut ground with me and photographed all of it against the baseline images she had taken years before. And the difference between the two sets of pictures was, in her word, catastrophic, and that word went in a sworn declaration. We filed a formal enforcement action with the photographs, the recorded easement, the restoration plan, Gary's work order on association paper, and Maddie's video naming Tasker Grounds and Landscape as the contractor. With the county, I filed the obstruction complaint about the welded gate across the 51 easement, and I attached the open records evidence that the second phase drainage study illegally routed a 100-year storm across protected land, and I sent a copy to Dale Pruitt, who wrote back one line on county letterhead confirming the documented pattern. And with Sal Ferraro, I did the most ordinary thing in the world. 'Cause months earlier, when Russ first told me about the second phase, I had started reading everything public about Tasker Grounds and Landscape, the way I read everything. The Secretary of State's office puts liens on the public record for anyone who cares to look, and most people never look. I looked. What I found was that Kurt Tasker had borrowed heavily to buy his mowers and his trucks and his skid steers and his 2 big slope mowers, and that the loans were secured by the equipment itself, recorded as UCC liens, and that the paper on most of that debt had been bundled and sold to a regional lender. I had printed all of it and put it in the folder long before the bush hogs ever came, not because I had a plan, but because that is the reflex of a man who has spent his life learning that the answer is usually already recorded somewhere, waiting. So I called Sal, who I had worked with for 20 years, and I asked him a simple question. Who holds the defaulted paper on Tasker Grounds and Landscape, and do they want to sell it? Sal made 2 calls and called me back. They were 90 days behind. He said the lender did not want mowers. A lender never wants mowers. A lender wants to be made whole, and a defaulted loan on depreciating equipment is a headache they will sell at a discount to anyone serious. I was serious. On a Thursday in September, after Sal's paperwork cleared, the secured lien position on every truck, every mower, and every skid steer with Tasker Grounds and Landscape on the door legally belonged to me for less than the steel was worth. I did not tell Brenda. I did not tell Russ. I did not tell Maddie until it was done. I filed it. The county set the second phase drainage hearing for a Tuesday in October, which I noticed because Tuesday in October was the day Carol died, and I took it as the universe finally getting its paperwork in order. The hearing was public. The Planning Commission chamber was full, because half the county had a stake in whether 94 houses became 134. Kurt Tasker was there in a suit with the development's engineer and a lawyer. Brenda was there in the front row in pink, and Russ was there, and Dale Pruitt, the code officer, was there in the back in his county shirt, and Maddie sat next to me. The Tasker engineer presented the drainage plan first. He was a young man with good slides and a laser pointer, and he was not a liar. He was just working from an assumption somebody upstream of him had made and never checked. It was a good presentation. It was also built entirely on the premise that the low draw across my lower 20 acres was available to carry their stormwater, and he said so out loud, in the recorded public meeting, more than once. When he finished, the chairwoman, a steady woman named Lorna who had run that commission for years, asked if there was anyone present who wished to speak to the drainage routing. I stood up. I gave my name. And I did not give a speech. I walked to the table, and I laid one document on it in front of the commission. The recorded conservation easement, certified copy, stamped by the county clerk, dated 4 years prior, prohibiting any alteration, fill, or construction affecting the draw and its wetland buffer across my lower 20 acres, in perpetuity. I asked the clerk, who was sitting right there at the side table, to confirm whether it was a true and active recorded instrument. She pulled it up on her own screen, the county's own system, looked at it, and said into her microphone that it was recorded, indexed, and active, with no amendments. The chamber went quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when everyone realizes at the same moment that the meeting they came to is already over. Lorna read the easement language out loud, slowly, the part that said in perpetuity, and then she looked over the top of her glasses at the Tasker engineer and asked him whether his plan routed stormwater across that easement. He looked at his shoes. The Tasker lawyer started to talk fast about amendments and accommodations and good faith negotiation. Lorna held up one hand, the way you would stop traffic, and he stopped. Then I laid down the second piece of paper, the lien filing, certified from the Secretary of State. I said for the record, in a level voice, that I had recently and lawfully acquired the secured debt position on the equipment of Tasker Grounds and Landscape, the contractor of record on the unauthorized destruction of the very easement we were discussing, and that I mentioned it only because the Commission should know that the same equipment currently in default was the equipment proposed in the application to perform the grading for this second phase. I did not raise my voice. I did not turn around. I did not look at Brenda in the front row in her pink blazer. I straightened the 2 pages so their edges lined up the way I line up everything, and I sat back down next to my daughter. You could have heard a pin drop on carpet. Let me give you the 2 numbers, because they are the whole story. The conservation easement on my land was recorded and legally enforceable for 4 years before the first bush hog ever touched my field. And in 5 years of Brenda Tasker's fines and complaints, she had collected from me exactly $0, because she never had the authority to collect a cent. And on the other side of the ledger, by the end of that hearing, the second phase that depended on my draw was dead. 94 homeowners learned their president had committed their association as a co-defendant in a conservation easement enforcement action with statutory penalties running into 6 figures. The one that mowed my field to teach me a lesson was in default on equipment that now answered to me. 4 years recorded against 5 years of fines that bought her nothing but the destruction of her own scheme. The consequences came the way water comes downhill, which is to say, without any help from me. The Planning Commission denied the second phase, and without those 40 lots the Tasker development financing fell apart. The Land Trust's enforcement action settled with the association and Tasker grounds, and Landscape jointly funding the full restoration of my field. Under a court-supervised plan, which meant the same company that cut my grasses down was legally required to pay to put them back, Brenda resigned the presidency she had held for 9 years 2 weeks after the hearing. In a recall vote, her own neighbors called, because it turned out homeowners do not enjoy being made liable for one woman's certainty and the equipment. I called the loan because it was in default, and that was my right. And Tasker, Grounds, and Landscape could not pay. So the trucks and the mowers and the skid steers, every machine with that green logo on the door, came to me. I did not keep the name. I kept the equipment, hired Gary, the foreman who had looked sick that day in my drive, and the man knew how to run a crew. I leased the machines back into the same county at honest rates and let the company that had been Tasker Grounds and Landscape become something that actually maintained things instead of bullying people. I bought their landscaping company. In the end, not out of revenge, but because it was the collateral on a debt, and I am a man who reads the fine print. The welded gate across my 51 easement came down on a Saturday in the spring. After. The same week, the meadowlarks came back. Maddie ran the angle grinder herself. She was home for the weekend, and she asked if she could be the one to do it. And I handed her the safety glasses and the gloves, and I stood back the way Carol used to stand back, and let me build the foundation crooked once before I learned. The sparks came off the chain in a bright orange fan, and the lock fell in the gravel. And Maddie bent down and picked it up and put it in her jacket pocket and said she was keeping it. I asked what for. She said, "So I remember it came down." We pushed the gate open on its hinges, and the lane ran clear all the way to the lower acres. For the first time in 2 years, the lane Otto had recorded in 1951 with a fountain pen, and Maddie walked down it ahead of me into the green coming up out of the cut ground. The way native grass does when its roots are older than the trouble on top of it. She is 20 now, studying soil science up at the state school because of that field. She walks the boundary with Priya from the Land Trust every spring and writes the bloom dates on the same kind of legal pad I taught her to use. Carol would have liked that more than anything else in this whole story, more than the hearing, more than the company, more than any of it. The land stayed in the family, the birds came back, and the next person to keep the records is already keeping them in her own hand at the same kitchen window where her mother used to name the meadowlarks. Here is the lesson. Plain, because you have been patient, and you have earned it. If you own land, go to the courthouse and read your own deed, all of it, and read your neighbor's too. Because the paper that protects you was almost always written by someone who is gone, and it only works if you know it exists. Record everything you do to your property with the county and the relevant agency, because a hobby is sentimental, but a recorded instrument is enforceable. When somebody with a clipboard tells you that you are functionally part of their jurisdiction, ask them to put it in writing, and then file that writing, because people rarely sign their name to a lie twice. Keep a folder. Photograph it, back it up to 2 places, and date everything. You do not win these fights by being the loudest person on the gravel drive. You win them by being the person who can lay one true recorded document on the table while everyone else is still talking. The calm is not weakness. The calm is the folder. If you have got a story like this, a fence, a gate, a letter on somebody's fancy letterhead telling you what you can do with land that is yours, put it in the comments, because I read them, and so do a lot of people who needed to hear they are not crazy. Subscribe if you want more of these, because there are more. And the next one is about a woman whose HOA tried to bill her for the private road her own grandfather paved. And what she found when she pulled the maintenance agreement nobody else had ever bothered to read. Take care of your records. I will see you on the next one.